Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Frequency of Love. My name is Adeline Jones, and my guest today is Matthew Frum. He is a meditation instructor and a creator of stillnessdaily.org. He was ordained by the Dalai Lama in India and spent 5 years as a Buddhist monk, including 2.5 years in solitary meditation retreat in a remote hermitage near Big Sur. He returned from the monastic life inspired to become an everyday monk, and several of his teachers have encouraged him to teach. He says he is passionate about helping people fall in love with themselves, others in their life, through the practice of effortless presence. Thank you so much, Matthew, for being here today. I wanted to have you in for a few reasons. One is that your presence is so beautiful, and you really, I think, are a person who really is putting into practice in the world this idea of heading in the direction of an awakened individual. And without being, in other words, you sort of left the monastic life to bring, that out into the world and live in the world among us ordinary people.
Right.
And I also wanted to talk to you about just being a monk, because I think that's a very fascinating journey. So, but I want to start with actually where you were at the age of 22, when you said you were living in Chicago and you discovered meditation.
Sure. Okay.
What was going on for you then?
Well, I had moved to Chicago to be an artist. I had gotten a scholarship to the Art Institute of Chicago and was planning to pursue that career. And then when I moved out there a week before classes started, I found out that my scholarship was revoked because my mom made something like $50 more than the cutoff line for the scholarship. And so it was very interesting timing. I remember thinking, what is the meaning of this? How bizarre that I'm here to do this. I'd rented an apartment in a very rough area so that I could have 2 rooms. I wanted a room to paint in, and I was right next to the L tracks, and there were gangs, there were cars that would be burning in the middle of the street at night, and it was just a very rough area. And so I just thought, okay, well, I'll just explore being an artist on my own. And I got a job waiting tables, and it was actually a very stressful job for me. I'm not a natural waiter. And so I was just sort of in this phase of trying to figure out what I was doing with my life. And it ended up leading me into kind of a stage of depression and a lot of anxiety and disconnection, living in this crazy, really dirty, dingy area, an apartment with rats and cockroaches. And I just, at one point, I remember having this breakthrough moment where I didn't really believe in God or anything at that point. I'd kind of set all of that aside. Having been raised Christian, as a teenager, I just sort of put all that aside. And I remember just praying to I didn't know who to please guide me, show me what I'm here for. Who am I? What am I doing? I remember I was standing in the bathroom looking at myself in the mirror under this dangling light bulb in this creepy bathroom in my apartment, and just looking at myself in the mirror, not recognizing myself, thinking, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
And so I think that prayer somehow led to a really beautiful series of events. I met a new friend on the train a few days later who we started talking about meditation, and he gave me a book on meditation. We became friends, and I started meditating based on that book, and it was perfect time in my life. I really needed it. I had tried meditating once years before in high school and thought, I can't do this. I just thought my mind was too crazy. I'm not destined to be a meditator. Maybe some people can do this and some people can't. And I had concluded that it wasn't for me. And so, but at this point, the stress and the suffering was deep enough that I really wanted to give it a try. And I remember after a few sessions, it just clicked. I was sitting on my bed. It was in the evening, and the trains were rushing by, and the whole building would shake every few minutes as the train rushed by. And I just remember somehow just shifting into a glimpse or a moment of stillness, of peace inside myself that I had never tasted, or maybe I'd tasted only as a child. And I remember tears, just spontaneous tears. Just it was quite a powerful moment. And so after that, I was hooked. I started really meditating regularly, and then a few weeks later, after that first experience, my new friend invited me to go see the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama was visiting Chicago, and I somehow very miraculously got the last available ticket to the auditorium the day before the event, and it happened to be in the third row. There was going to be a piano in the way. Philip Glass was playing piano before, and it was an obstructed view, but somehow they moved the piano, and I had perfect view of the Dalai Lama. I just remember looking at his feet. I was just so his whole being, but just seeing his shoes, and he was just so simple and humble and profound. His presence was very profound, and I just remember weeping and being overwhelmed by his descriptions of compassion, talking about compassion in a way that I'd never heard of before. So that really moved me, and I think that was a real pivot point where I remember thinking, I wonder if I'm going to be a Buddhist. And it just seemed like such a bizarre thought to me, because I'd pretty much rejected religion as something just superstitious, or so that got me very interested in meditation.
Well, why had you rejected religion earlier?
Yeah, well, I was raised in a very Christian family. My dad was a missionary growing up. He would go to Haiti or India or Africa on these long missionary trips. And before he married my mom, he was a monk for a brief period of time in a Catholic monastery near Snowmass, Colorado. So I grew up going to the monastery with him to visit the monks, and I think that planted a seed for things later for me. But so I was a very spiritual kid, but then when I was a teenager, I began to realize that I was gay, and that was a real it was a really difficult experience. I prayed and prayed for God to change me. That was the message that I got, was that it was it was evil, that you needed to pray to be changed. And so and then at some point that just seemed so wrong for me that I came to the conclusion that I was who I was, and that I loved how I loved, and so I just thought, gosh, if Christianity is wrong about this, what else are they wrong about? And just started looking at religion and thinking, wow, has it just been used to manipulate people and control people? And I kind of had a very cynical view of religion at that point, and of God. And so that caused me to reject religion. Yeah.
All of it. I mean, basically all of it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why it was so surprising when I found myself feeling so drawn to Buddhism.
Well, can you explain a little bit more about when you saw the Dalai Lama, and you did say that that it was just a palpable experience, or when he spoke about compassion in a way that was more vast and palpable than I had ever imagined. That's what you said. So can you explain anything? Like, what was it that was so powerful?
Well, I think on several levels. One thing that I came to experience very, very clearly and palpably later as a Buddhist monk was the presence of an awakened being. It's distinct. Like when living with my teacher, I could feel whether he was in the vicinity or not. His presence was so strong that it just would slow my mind down, settle my being. I began to notice when I was around these beings how my whole energy body just changed.
Right.
And so I think that was going on. People describe that sort of thing around the Dalai Lama, the energy field of his vast compassion and his awakened mind. So So I think that was happening, even though I wasn't aware of it. But then also the things that he talked about, I I remember him saying, "There's no need to become a Buddhist. There's no need," which really appealed to me. Um, the most important thing is to have a good heart. And I thought, yeah, that rings absolutely true. Like he said, if you're raised in a particular religion, that's wonderful. Follow that religion, but only if it helps you generate a good heart.
Right.
And I remember him telling a story about one of his friends, a lama who I later met in India, an old lama who's now passed away, who had been imprisoned by the Chinese and tortured for many, many years during the Cultural Revolution and the invasion of Tibet. And this lama eventually escaped from prison, or was released and escaped from Tibet into India and was reunited with the Dalai Lama. They were close friends. And the Dalai Lama talked about how when he first saw this monk, he was so happy to see him, and they were talking, and he said, "At what point in this whole experience did you experience the most fear?" And he said that this monk, this lama, told him, "There were a few times when I felt in danger of losing compassion for the Chinese."
Oh, gosh.
And I think that's when I started crying, because I just couldn't imagine someone who's being imprisoned and tortured by other people
Right.
holding a mind of love and compassion for them through the whole thing.
Oh,
And
gosh.
at certain moments, maybe being on the verge of losing compassion for them, and that was seen
Right.
as the most dangerous thing.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think these people are cut from an entirely different cloth. So we'll get to that.
They're not. That's the thing. That's what they
Don't tell me
say.
that. I have thousands more lifetimes to get even close.
Me too. But it's possible. They're proof.
Oh, okay. Well, so you left Chicago, and then you went on to learn to, is this when you had decided that you were going to become a monk? Or
Well, it was soon after, I was in Chicago for a few more months and just started craving peace and nature and wanting to meditate. And it didn't seem like the right environment for me to meditate. And I wanted to be near my family again. And I moved home to Colorado Springs, and I saw a flyer in a bookstore window about a group of monks that were coming to visit. And so I called up the group and offered to volunteer, and I went. I remember showing up at the chapel where they were going to be chanting and that sort of thing, and all the monks were in there setting up, all these Tibetan monks. And I just remember seeing, the minute I saw them, just started crying again. I had this feeling of home. Some voice or something inside me said home so strongly that I had to sit down. I sat down in the back of the church and just was sort of knocked off my feet by it. I thought, what was that? And it just seemed so bizarre to me. I thought, I wonder, am I going to be a monk?
And still you're thinking, how weird is
how
that?
bizarre, because I didn't even really consider myself a Buddhist at that point. But I loved their chanting and was very moved by it. And then the Lama who had brought them to the United States came to visit the town, and he would come a few times a year, Geshe Gelsen, and he was my first teacher. I was just deeply moved by his presence. He now has passed away. He passed away about 5 years ago. But I began studying with him. I became a Buddhist under his guidance, and then he guided me in the training towards the preparation towards becoming a monk. So,
well, how do you explain this, that you felt at home? Do you have any way of explaining that?
To me now, now that I am a Buddhist, and now all the experiences I've had around the Tibetans, their culture that's entirely based on this worldview, this view of life and the cosmos, and it includes reincarnation. It's just that's a central theme of their world experience. And so they, when their teachers pass away, they go and find the teacher. They follow omens and dreams and signs, and or the teacher leaves a letter saying where he or she will be reborn and where to find him or her. And so they go and find these reincarnate masters, and there's so many stories of this, and I've witnessed enough just sort of unexplainable events around that I thoroughly believe in reincarnation at this point.
Yeah.
And so that's how I would explain it now,
Yeah.
that I had some connection in the past with the Tibetans and with the monks, and I was recognizing my people.
Yeah, how beautiful. So tell us a little bit about the training to become a monk. What is some of what you do to do that?
Well, it varies. Some people, it varies from different teachers, and it varies between individuals. Some people might be ready to ordain instantly, and then others, like me, need a lot of
well, some people probably need lifetimes, right?
Right. Yeah. So I needed 7 years, and that was what the amount of time that it also took me to feel fully ready. Even though I really wanted to go, it was important to me to finish my degree. I had started back to school to get a degree in philosophy, and I was living with my grandmother, and I was working in hospice as a caregiver, and I felt like it was important to hang in there through that whole experience. Eventually, she passed away, which was it was a beautiful thing to be there for,
Right.
and so yeah, so that it was just the timing of it all, but also the preparation really involves. There are certain meditations and reflections that you do in order to really get clear about what brings happiness and what brings suffering. That's really the essence of Buddhism in a nutshell. That's what the Buddha says. That's what I taught. The Buddha says, is what brings happiness and what brings suffering. And so that's what we meditate on. We look at how certain states of mind of grasping, craving towards more, towards the future, and aversion, regret about the past, these states of mind that destabilize us and that disconnect us from what we really are, from the truth of what we are here and now. And so we meditate on the causes of suffering and happiness. We meditate on the preciousness of this opportunity, this precious human rebirth that we have. This very rare. It's seen as very, very rare and very fortunate when we have a human rebirth, and we've met the teachings, and we have the opportunity to actually study and practice and achieve enlightenment. It's seen as so extremely rare and fortunate. So you meditate on that and on how quickly it's passing, on death and impermanence, how quickly death is approaching. We never know when the time of our death is going to be. Every moment we're coming closer to our death. Our life is so short, and so what do we want to use it for? So thoughts like that, and then the motivation of compassion, which is the central motivation of the practice in Mahayana Buddhism, is that everything is done out of this wish to serve others, to help others to awaken. In fact, that's the primary motivation for ourselves to awaken. We want to awaken for our own happiness, but we're just one being. If we awaken for the happiness of all, then it's seen as a much vaster enlightenment.
Well, and the two go hand in hand, though. I mean, don't you think? In other words, if you're an awakened individual, all you want to do is love and serve. If you're really truly I would think that would be the sign.
Yeah.
If you see somebody who wants to love and serve, it's pretty like, okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely, and that's definitely part of the teaching, because what we're awakening from is our false sense of separation, our false self, the way that we draw this sort of coloring book line around ourselves conceptually and think that we're separate from the world when we're completely interpenetrated and interconnected with the world. on an energetic level now, scientifically, we know that as fact. I mean, you could never separate one being from the cosmos, and we can't separate our consciousness from the great consciousness of all either. When we look into our mind, there's no separation, and so on all levels, we're not separate, but we have this habitual perception of being separate, having this solid, separately existent self, and as long as we believe in that, then we have fear. As soon
Yeah.
as we separate ourselves from the universe, as one Buddhist teacher, Robert Thurman, says, then it's you against the universe,
Right.
and who's going to win?
Well, it's very lonely.
Yeah.
And it's also, I feel like, not our true home. Like we're separate from each other, so we're alone, and we're also not in our true home anymore. And that's
Yeah.
a terrible feeling.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we're always going to be unsettled on some level as long as we're not at home in the universe.
Right. So how do you describe that? I mean, why do we have this sense of separation? Why don't we just become, why aren't we born just knowing exactly who we are, where we
Yeah.
belong, and where we're living this human life?
Well, I think some people are. I think
I think they're in the minority, though.
Yeah. I think I mean, from a Buddhist point of view, it's said to be beginningless. That this
Beginningless?
that the cycle of existence, birth and death and rebirth, is beginningless. That we've had beginningless lives from a Buddhist point of view. So they don't even posit a beginning.
Okay.
So, but who knows, really? And that's not seen as the most important thing. But there are certain questions that the Buddha answered, and others that he just remained silent about. And on questions of really the origin of the universe and that sort of thing, he remained silent. And he said, his response was, if a man has been shot by an arrow, how silly or foolish it would be for that man to lay there dying on the ground and go, who shot this arrow? Where did it come from? What village did this man live in? How did he make this arrow? He said that would be ridiculous. Well, that's the situation we're in. We've been shot by this arrow of suffering and of delusion and craving, and we're lying on the ground dying from this, and we're obsessed with figuring out how it all started or how it happened. He said that's not the important point. The important thing is figuring out how to pull the arrow out, that we can get free, realizing that we can get free of this suffering.
It's such a beautiful way to describe it. When you were ordained, and you were ordained by the Dalai Lama, and you said that was a very significant event in your life. What is that like? And you were actually ordained twice prior. So
Right.
tell us about that.
Yeah, so I took the novice vows with Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who Geshe Geltsen, who helped me prepare to ordain. He was based in the U.S. and in California, and he encouraged me to ordain with Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who was giving ordination in Nepal at his monastery there. And so I left to do that. And at that point, Lama Zopa Rinpoche became really my main teacher as my ordination master. And he and Lama Zopa Rinpoche then advised me to take the full ordination with the Dalai Lama later. And so I did that in India at the Dalai Lama's home in Dharamsala. That was just really, I mean, both ordinations were very peak moments for me. I just can't fully explain why, but just the ritual around it, the energy of these awakened beings initiating, to be initiated into their way of life, just felt like such an honor and a privilege. And yeah, and to have that experience with the Dalai Lama will always be one of the most cherished moments in my life. I remember there were about 40 monks, mostly Tibetan. There were three other Westerners, or three other non Tibetans, and so yeah, I just remember going up to him after he would recite all these prayers over us and snap his fingers, and that was it. As soon as he snapped his fingers, you were a monk.
Did you feel as they say, I guess in Christianity and maybe in
Yeah.
Buddhism, a quickening, sort of a
Oh, yeah.
change in yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. It was just an incredible flood of energy that I felt through my whole body, and I seemed to have some visions of this whole lineage of monks of that I was being ordained into, and yeah, I just images in my mind that arose, and incredible joy, bliss, and I remember we would go up to His Holiness. He was on his throne, and just going up to him and him cradling my face, just holding my head, and his hands just cradling, like looking at me with such love, like it was my mother looking at her most precious child or something. It was just this unbelievable love and affection, just caressing my face like I was his child, and that I will always just remember the feeling of that. I was walking on cloud nine for many days afterwards.
I don't think a lot of us have that experience. And actually, that reminds me, one of the questions I always like to ask people is, what do you know about the power of love?
Wow. Well, I think that's what this is all about. I mean, really, that's what the power of love is what our entire practice is about, what our life journey is about. And I think that's true probably for non-religious people, in addition to
Right.
religious or spiritual people. Everyone appreciates love, something that His Holiness talks about a lot, actually, when he's often giving these public talks to general audiences of non-religious or non-Buddhists, and he very often emphasizes that everybody appreciates love and compassion. There's no one who doesn't have some seed of that in their being, doesn't know what that feels like to be
Right.
loved. And so, yeah, so I think that's the essence of what we are, because it's when we see through that false sense of self, the love automatically arises. The love, the love and the positive emotions are deeply rooted in reality. The negative emotions, such as anger and hatred and fear and jealousy and pride, all of those are rooted in the false self. Those arise from the false self. When you have this false sense of self, then you need to protect that self. You need to build it up. You need to, conquer others who might attack it. You need to, all of the negative emotions arise out of that misperceived self. When that's out of the way, then there's nothing but love, a sense of connection, warmth, joy, bliss, all the positive emotions, patience, on and on, humility.
Like if that is the default of the universe.
Right.
And
exactly.
when we can unveil ourselves to become that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it looks to me like somebody like the Dalai Lama or the Pope or, or Gandhi or Jesus, when they're demonstrating love, it looks very courageous. And now I'm thinking that it's not so much courageous as that they were just able to walk so truthfully in who they truly are.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Right, absolutely. Yeah, it's
and the love itself is powerful, because I always ask the question because I'm just not sure that we know about the power of love. When I think it's truly powerful.
Right. It is. I mean, they say that the love is so much more powerful because it's real.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
is
right,
grounded in reality. It's more stable. The false
right.
self is actually inherently very unstable and
Mm,
insecure. That's where all of our insecurity arises from. We all experience stress and insecurity at times, as long as we're considering ourselves to be separate.
yeah.
And so uh, we have to constantly do things to bolster our self-image and our self-esteem, and we worry because of that intrinsic misperception. And so the the delusion is actually quite unstable, and they say it can dissolve instantaneously, under the right circumstances. Uh, but for most of us, it takes many lifetimes. It's a
Yeah.
process of glimpsing that freedom, that awakened state, and then forgetting because
Mhm,
of the
mhm.
the eons of habit, the eons of
Yeah.
pattern.
And we just have to remind ourselves
Yeah.
constantly. And it's also a real switch for us, at least Westerners now in this day and age, to think of, like I was telling you this morning, I just got this, you know, this is a spiritual world.
Hmm.
And maybe that's not even the right way to describe it, but this stuff that looks invisible and elusive is actually the reality.
Yeah.
Like love and energy and awareness,
Mhm.
and that's what's real. And I mean, I'm starting to kind of get it
Hmm. Yay.
more and more, and also to be able to rely on it and step into it. So
Yeah.
even if I don't know it in my mind, just to know it and go forward as if
Yeah.
that is the reality, because and that's what Jesus taught. That's what that's what Buddhism is about. That
Mhm.
this unseen world, spiritual world, is the real world.
Yeah.
And I think it's what truly sustains us. It truly feeds us. I mean, so I hear you talking about, because you might look at becoming a monk and thinking, oh my gosh, really? I mean, it looks a little bit scary. And you're talking about the joy and the bliss,
Hmm.
and it's that tapping into that truth of who we are. I think
Yeah.
that brought you.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point, because there are elements of the monastic path that are very austere. There
Yeah.
are 250 some vows, and when a fully ordained monk takes all of these vows, in addition to the core vows of celibacy and not killing, not stealing, that sort of thing. But there are just so many vows about how to sit, how to sleep, how to walk, how to chew, how to
Oh my
do
goodness.
everything, and it's all set up to withdraw the practitioner from the worldly life, to create this framework and this structure that's fully oriented around going very deep inwardly.
Mm.
And so, but in our day and age, it can seem um, really sort of like uh, just so austere and so sort of like world denying, and it's actually it is oriented to help one withdraw from the world so that you can get more still inwardly. But that's the point of all these vows. They all have a purpose, but it's hard to sort of understand them in our current cultural context.
Well, they're probably very powerful, and ancient, and
Yeah,
they work for what they're trying to accomplish. So
yeah,
it does seem odd for us, but it works,
yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah. Right. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and for me, it was very helpful, even though it ended up not being where I felt like I was called to live for my entire life. It was extremely helpful because I have such a busy mind. I've always had just a very curious and busy mind, wanting to figure things out, a very creative mind, wanting, imagining new things, and I needed the support of the ritual, the tradition, the robes, where you only have one thing to wear. Your head is
Right.
shaved, so you don't have to worry about what your hair looks like. You don't. It's just such a simple way of life,
Mm-hmm.
and you only have a certain number of possessions, and you're supposed to not eat after midday. So that reduces the amount of food preparation and distraction, and
Right.
it's all set up to actually really support a very calm, clear mind, which I experienced as being very helpful. Uh, yeah,
So tell us about Lama Zopa Rinpoche,
yeah.
for whom you were an attendant. Is that how you say?
Yeah, I was not his immediate attendant, but I lived in his home with him. I was invited to stay with him in his home in Aptos, California. He lives there for a few months out of the year when he's not traveling to the various monasteries and centers that he oversees around the world. And so uh, I was there for a year, and during that particular year, he was there for about 5 months. And so it was a really incredible honor and privilege to actually get to live with him, with an enlightened being. I was helping serve in all sorts of ways around the house with cooking and filling water bowls. He has rooms full of big bowls full of saffron water it's a very traditional practice of offering. And so I would spend many hours a day filling these bowls and emptying them and filling them and emptying them. And it was a very, very beautiful, powerful practice. And then he was up day and night because he, from a very young age, never slept. He doesn't sleep, they say, because he's the reincarnation of a previous master who transcended the need to sleep. So he doesn't sleep, and so we would be up all hours of the night doing prayers and chanting and rituals and or writing letters. He gets letters from thousands of students all over the world, and he writes these beautiful letters in response, and so we would be helping take dictation or yeah, he was a phenomenal being to be around. The power of his presence was just such an effect on me, and just to see someone who's literally oriented towards serving others every single moment of the day. It's just his total MO.
Yeah.
And so that was an amazing experience. It felt like really getting to live with a modern saint.
Well, and the story that you told of how he knew at such an early age that he was a reincarnated
Yeah.
monk.
Yeah, right. Yeah, in his village where he was born, he as soon as he could speak, he was saying, "Take me to my cave." Before he could speak, he was crawling out the door and crawling down the path to try to get up to the cave where his predecessor had lived, and he recognized all of his objects, his previous possessions. They do these tests
Mm-hmm.
to test whether the child is actually the reincarnation. There are all these different tests, and so yeah, yeah, he's a Buddha. I think th- there are some people who really have actually completed the path on this planet, and it's such a blessing to see someone like that. They're just constantly healing and serving others, and with all that he manages, I never ever saw a trace, an iota of stress after going day and night, never ever sleeping. I never saw it. Was just always just this lightness, this sort of blissful energy, this
Right.
joy, this humor, uh, phenomenal clairvoyance, just incredible capacity to.
And you were talking about that their level of awareness is just extraordinary. And so tell us about the story that you were telling about before the tsunami
Yeah,
in
that was a
Indonesia.
very interesting experience. The tsunami happened on Christmas. When we found out about it Christmas morning, and I don't remember what year that was, but anyway, the night before Christmas Eve, Rinpoche wanted to. I guess it was Christmas Eve. I'm not sure if I'm getting that right or wrong, but it was right around then. And he wanted to take everybody out to eat. Most of the monks and nuns living at the house, there were about 6 or 7 of us helping to serve him because one person would be completely, utterly exhausted and left in the dust. So, so he wanted to take us all out to eat because we were all Westerners. We all had the tradition of Christmas, and I think he could sense that we were all kind of missing Christmas or something. It was very sweet of him to want to take us out to eat for Christmas. And so we went out to eat, and then afterwards he was very adamant and urgent about wanting to go down to the water, to the ocean, out to the dock. And we had to stop home and get all this equipment and go down to the water. We got buckets and we got rope, and he wanted to bless the water, which is a practice that he would do occasionally, but he seemed very urgent and adamant about it this time. And he took us out on the pier, and it got very, very cold and foggy, and we're all in our robes, and it was it was freezing, and we were there for hours, for many hours, hauling up buckets of water and then reciting mantras over the water, reciting prayers and doing visualizations and very intensive visualizations of filling the water with light, and then pouring that into the ocean and imagining that all the oceans on the planet were blessed, that all the ocean on the planet, all the water on the planet was filled with light and with the consciousness of love and peace in that. He was describing these visualizations and saying that all the beings in the water are blessed. Any human beings who are swept into the water, their minds are completely blessed, and they feel complete peace, and they will achieve enlightenment. And he's describing all of these visualizations. And so we were doing this for hours and thought, gosh, he's really, really adamant about doing this for so long. And we went home that night, and then the next morning when I got up, I heard that the tsunami had happened and how many people had been drowned in the ocean. And I went into his room that morning. He rang, and I was the one to answer his bell, and he was sitting on the floor with a stick of incense in front of the altar, and he looks up at me and he said, "Did you hear about the tsunami?" And I said, "Yes, Rinpoche." And I said, "I feel so happy that we blessed all of the oceans last night." And he just looked at me and he smiled.
Did he hear about it through the news, or he just knew?
I don't know. That's a good question. I imagine probably through the news, because we would watch the news sometimes. He liked to watch Larry King. And a few days later or a week later, we were watching Larry King, and there was this supermodel, I can't remember her name, who had been vacationing there and gotten swept into the ocean, and so she was being interviewed, and it was fascinating to be sitting there watching her with Rinpoche, and she was saying how when she was swept into the ocean, this incredible peace came over her, and she felt her whole body filled with light.
You're kidding.
And she felt love for all the humans around her that were swept into the ocean, and she just felt compassion for them, and she said it was the most amazing experience.
Wow.
And she pretty much described what he had told us to visualize.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's incredible. You also said that he builds structures and buries them in California, or
he does all sorts of he's constantly building sacred objects, and somewhat a very large scale in India. Like it was for many years trying to build a 500-foot statue of a Buddha, the future Buddha, Maitreya in India, would be one of the largest statues in the world. It's now not going to be quite 500 feet. I don't know. I haven't kept up with it. But he also builds stupas and all these sacred structures. In particular, he's been working on that in California for some years to help counteract the possibility of earthquakes there. I don't know if it's his visions, or he also consults with oracles, and they taught. Many times when we were living with him, all of a sudden it was very urgent to do prayers and practices to help avert an earthquake, and he would call the monasteries in India and have thousands and thousands of monks doing certain prayers and meditations to help prevent the great disaster.
So, in your prayer and meditation, or the ones that he would ask you to do, perhaps, are you sending out a particular? How are you praying that you might avert or reduce the impact of an earthquake, for example?
Well, there were different practices. There were considered to be different deities that had more impact over the earth element, and so there were practices in relation to certain deities. In the Tibetan form of Buddhism is Vajrayana Buddhism, which is it also has some connections or roots in the shamanic religion of Tibet, the indigenous religion of Tibet before Buddhism came to Tibet. But Vajrayana Buddhism arose in India and then moved to Tibet. So the Tibetan Buddhism has certain kind of shamanic elements or similarities to working with deities and with devas and with the elemental forces, and in order to serve others. It's entirely out of the wish to be of benefit to others. Working with the weather, there were practices around trying to help generate rain. One time, I remember hearing a story about Lama Zopa Rinpoche at a retreat in India where they set up this big ritual and they were outside, and it's very elaborate, and they spent a long time preparing for all these people, and then it started pouring rain, and everybody thought, "Oh no, what's going to happen? It'll get canceled." And then Rinpoche went inside, and he had a stick of incense, and he was seen inside saying prayers with the stick of incense, and the rain sort of parted just in this circle right around everything all around got completely soaked just over this little area.
Oh my goodness gracious!
So there's a lot of practices, tantric practices around how to work with the elements and these forces.
And so, but this idea that we're all awareness. I mean, you were saying that we are all awareness. Are these deities or divas?
Mm-hmm.
Where do they fall into the awareness hierarchy?
That's a good question. Well, the interesting thing, from a Buddhist point of view, and also just I think in general in Asia and other in other cultures, there's this experience of all sorts of unseen classes of beings and types of beings. And here in the West, we think of, if it's not human, if it's not embodied, then it's a ghost.
Right.
That's pretty much the only category we have is ghost. It must be a ghost, or it's but they have these elaborate. That there are just as many classes of spirits or non-embodied beings as there are humans. And it makes sense to me. You look at all the different types of humans, you look at all the different types of animals, there's just no shortage of creativity in the universe. It's
exactly.
just on and on and on, all the variation. And why we think that the beings who are not in a body would all be the same is just kind of funny. To Tibetans, there's all these different types and levels and classes of beings. And within those, some just like among humans, some are very kind-hearted and benevolent, and some are even enlightened and are working to serve others, and then others are more selfish and deluded and malevolent. And so, just like we find among humans, and so there are a lot of.
We have a lot to learn, don't we? So you spent 2.5 years, I believe, in as a hermit, essentially.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
I want to read to you a quote that you wrote. It's on your bio, but I love it. There in retreat, going many months without seeing or talking to another human being, I began to experience a mind-widening, heart-bursting connection to nature, to our planet, and to all living beings. I began to taste and envision the wonder of our human potential and grieve deeply for the suffering and loss we've inflicted upon ourselves, others, and the natural world. How did you Would you say that this is just sort of you becoming or as Adyashanti says, unbecoming who we are not? I mean, was this a process of like truth being revealed to you when you're saying these words?
There were definitely moments in retreat when I was more open and more connected to what I really am than I had ever been before. And so, yeah, I think that's an accurate way of describing it. It felt like unbecoming my false self. It felt like also experiencing a taste of what humans are, what we really are. I think we have such a limited, it's just a really tragically limited story of ourselves in this culture and at this time on our planet. We see ourselves as such limited and also in such a negative light. We talk about, oh, I'm only human, so that means I have faults, and that we see ourselves as inherently flawed. I think this goes back to like the Judeo-Christian worldview.
Right.
Not that that's necessarily what Jesus taught, but that's the worldview that evolved in that tradition. Whereas the Buddhist worldview is that we're innately pure, we're innately enlightened, and we're innately love at our core. And so we have Buddha nature. It's said that every being, every single living being, including the tiniest insect, has Buddha nature. If they experience suffering, they have the potential to become free of suffering, to become awakened. And I think that's what I started to sense into. I began to glimpse that when you're meditating 10, 12, 15 hours a day. I mean, it kind of is inevitable at some point that you're going to to have openings.
Wow.
There and living in such a sacred, pure place like I was living, this very remote valley that was just untouched and very difficult to get to, and there was nobody around except for 6 or 7 other monks and nuns who were living in their own little hermitages. And we didn't really see each other. We would go many months. I went like 7 months at a time, a couple times without seeing another human being, and so naturally you start to open to the other forces and the energies and the experiences of being fully human, fully present, and um, I guess just I felt more aware than I ever had before. It's not that I live in that state. Absolutely not. It's that's something that arose in that in that environment for periods of time, because it was such ideal and such a
Right.
conducive environment. It for me, it's an ongoing practice of learning to recognize that, to remember that. It's not one of the real, I think, the keys that that experience showed me, and that I learned from my teachers about awareness is that it just is what we are. We don't have to try to get there. And when I started to experience that, actually the effort is so often what takes us away from what we are. That when we fully relax and open to what we already are, it's right here, and it's not something
Yeah.
that like we don't have. You don't have to meditate for hours a day in order to experience it. It's just simply recognizing. It's just a shift of perspective. It's not a state of mind. Uh, it's just a perspective or a way of looking at life. And so that's what I really started to experience for the first time, was that there's nothing that can separate me from this. That there's nothing that I have to try to do to become it. And so there was this deep relaxation and laughter and incredible joy. I mean,
Wow.
if anybody had been around, I mean, there were times when I thought, am I bothering the other meditators? Because every once in a while I could hear one of them through the woods, very distantly. But I thought, can they hear me laughing hysterically like a
Wow.
lunatic? But it was just seeing the folly of grasping at this false self. I mean, it's
Wow.
such a joke. It's it's a tragic joke, but
Yeah.
it's really it's also very funny that we think that we're separate, and that we stake so much upon that, and so I started to have those types of experiences, and that's also part of what called me out of the monastic life and the
Mm-hmm.
monastic path. Ironically, I guess, was that began to realize that my true self, my true nature, is not separate from anything that I could do in the world. That I didn't actually need to be a monk living in retreat in order to experience awareness. That awareness was with me everywhere, no matter what I did, and
Right.
that I didn't have to necessarily go to such extremes, and that I also didn't have to deny certain parts of myself that I had set aside in order to become a monk, in order to live as a monk. My creative passion, my love for music and dance and relationship. Uh, I began to realize that all that can be brought into the path and the practice, and that's been my journey since leaving the monk's life about 6 years ago. Has been to figure out how to integrate that and how to remember what I am in the midst of the craziness and the busyness of this world.
Right. So you decided that you wanted to teach meditation now to the rest of us, not just the Buddhist. What made you make that decision?
I think that arose out of that time in retreat. I had this sense of myself, my calling as a bridge builder. I've always I've always walked in different circles and loved connecting people and translating things for people. There's something about that energy and that exchange that I've always enjoyed, and so I saw a need for that. I felt like some of the tools that I experienced, the meditative tools that I'd trained in, were so effective and so powerful, and yet they were so immersed in this very, very rich ancient tradition that's very elaborate and foreign and can be difficult for people to access.
Hmm.
And it and of course have been people translating some of these tools uh, into a more modern and secular language for a long time. But I had certain takes on it that I felt like I wanted to share, and that I felt like could be really helpful to people. And so that inspired me to want to share it, and I wasn't sure if it would be my place to do so, but I was encouraged to do so by my teachers, and so I've been doing that on and off. It's been a journey in these years since being a monk.
Yeah.
It hasn't been constant meditation teaching. There's been a lot of real ups and downs. I think I was pretty arrogant coming out of retreat. I felt like, oh, I can ride these waves, and it's tough out here.
Well, how so? What do you mean?
It's real. We live in such challenging times.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a world that's just so oriented to distract us. Our entire culture is actually, I feel like, really, I mean, like 98% of our culture is based on distraction. The constant busyness and entertainment and And there, of course, there's so much beauty and can be so much joy in all of that, but it becomes it it becomes kind of hard to separate from.
Yeah.
And and I also see the potential for all of the media and all of the online avenues to carry this consciousness and to share this wisdom, like what you're doing with this show and what I do with my website. And so there's incredible gifts in all of this, but boy, it's uh, it's a busy world and way of life,
Hmm.
and yeah.
Well, I mean, we've created that, and I think we create it because we don't understand this place that you have found. When you're in the wilderness for 2.5 years, or as a monk, any of that joy and all of that you're describing, many people haven't discovered that
Hmm.
at all. So all these distractions are keeping us away from what we were talking about earlier, the
Yeah.
loneliness and the fear. And
Yeah, right.
you said, quoting from your website, I believe meditation has the power to save us and our world from the inside out. That is so beautiful.
Hmm.
So, do you want to elaborate on what you're meaning there?
I think it really comes down to happiness and suffering again. It's really meditation makes it so clear as soon as we start trying to pay attention to the present moment, which is what the practice of mindfulness is. And that's the main type of meditation that I teach, and that's practiced in hospitals and schools, and it's practiced very widely in the secular world these days. Uh, so with mindfulness, when we're trying to pay attention to the present moment, to our breath or the sensations in our body, notice that it's very hard to do that. Our mind carries us away again and again, but the practice is noticing that and coming back to the moment, back to these sensations, and we begin to realize that we actually have a choice. We have a choice whether to follow those thoughts or not, and very often they're stressful thoughts. We notice that when we follow those thoughts, our body gets activated. We feel tense. We feel stressed. Why would we want to feel that way if we have
Yeah.
a choice? And so when we know that we have a choice, we can go down that track of suffering and anxiety, and then all of the ramifications of that and how that affects our health and our relationships and our work and everything. Uh, or we can, once we learn how to let the thought pass, come back into the moment, back into our body. It can be a little uncomfortable at first, but then as we rest with the sensations, it passes. And then the joy opens up. We start to notice and appreciate the moment and appreciate what we have already, that we see that we don't there's this moment is so rich. We don't need all that we're told by our culture that we need. We don't need to be more and have more and do more, and so once we start to realize that innate joy and freedom in the moment, uh, that that is what I feel can save our world, because our world is imperiled right now by the imbalance of the human mind and heart. We can see how this constant craving
Yeah.
that is the consumerism that's gripping the planet and cutting down all
Hmm.
the forests, and uh, you know it's this constant dissatisfaction, this inability to be okay with
Right.
ourselves in the moment, and to be and this inability to be with our suffering, to be with our pain, which is really the only way to heal it.
Yeah.
So when we can't be with it, we need to distract ourselves from it. We need to reach
Right.
for the cell phone or whatever it is, and then it's still there, and it builds up even more, and then we try to consume even more, and
Right. It's
so
an endless. It's
yeah,
endless.
so that's
Yeah.
how I feel meditation it can save us.
And it reminds me, sort of full circle to back when you were 22, and then you're in this stressed out, crazy life, and then you learn to meditate and just feel this deep sense of relief. Like,
Yeah,
there it is. There's that relief from this life I've gotten involved in.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and everybody can experience that.
All right. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Lovely to talk with you.
Oh, thank you. It's been an honor to be here.